Hi everyone, this is Dr Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast. We're actually talking about the canter. But just before we jump into that, I just wanted to let you know that I have a posture and behaviour masterclass coming up on the 23rd of October 2025. You can click the link in the description to sign up for this free event. I discuss many behaviours that often aren't thought to be related to posture and are often thought to be a primary behavioural issue, but how the physical body needs to be considered in that. So we'd love for you to join us there. How are you going today, Soph?
Hi, very well. It's a lovely day. So I'm just looking out the window at the sun, and we've been talking about everything canter this morning. Lots of things to discuss with you guys, and yeah, it's going to be really good.
Yeah, the canter is one gait that I personally have had a lot of struggles with. Jelly, particularly, it's one of the reasons that I have him is because he struggled so much with his canter, and he has for quite a long time. And it can be very frustrating because often the more that you work on the canter, the worse it gets. Like, it doesn't always get better from working on that actual canter itself. And it really can create a lot of anxiety for horses in their relationship with the canter. So yeah, it's a problem that that I kind of really understand myself. So what kind of gait is the canter?
The canter is a 3-beat gait. It's asymmetrical. So when you think of the trot, you're going quite symmetrically, like the right fore and right hind and left hind, left fore. They're traveling in the same kind of motion, but on the different sides of the body. But when you come to the canter, you've got an asymmetrical motion. There's a lot of spinal flexion and extension. It's very important that we have good core activation and strength, and that the trunk is very healthy in its overall motion.
Yeah, it really does give you a lot of information about the horse's system. Like, it really tells you everything about the horse's integration, like where their posture, strength, and emotional safety all kind of meet in that motion. So, if a horse is struggling with the canter, they can become very emotional to the point of, bucking, carrying, running off, and getting quite expressive about those struggles. And I think a lot of that has been put down to behavior, and so then they go to a trainer to help them with the canter. But often what's required is an improved understanding of the horse's function. And because horses don't want to make it more difficult for themselves, like if they can do something, they're generally going to do it. But if we look at the footfalls in the canter, so if we're thinking of a right lead canter, then so that means the right forelimb is the leading forelimb. Then what happens is the left hind creates the strike off, so the outside hind limb creates the strike off, and that becomes the trailing hind leg. And then the diagonal pair, so the right hind and left fore go together, so they hit the ground, move and hit the ground together, and then the right foreleg becomes the last part of the stride as the leading forelimb. So one side of the body is more, there's more weight bearing, more loading, and it just depends on the direction. There's also a brief moment of suspension before the next stride. So although it's a 3-beat gait, you do have a brief moment of suspension, which is also an important part of the canter because, you know, for example, I don't think that Jelly would have any moment of suspension often with his canter.
Could you just describe what you mean by a moment of suspension?
Yeah, so all legs off the ground is what it means. So there's a space in which all limbs are not in contact with the ground.
100%. And yeah, so you can imagine that, you know, the what we're just saying, the spinal flexion and extension is so important. You have to be able to lift because, you know, all of your limbs are going to be they've kind of contracted underneath the body while the body lifts, and then they're going to reach out while that left hind limb on the right leg canter, the left hind limb strikes off. It really stretches out behind the trailing, and then you open up and you extend and you reach forward with your right fore, and then you're coming. During that time, your spine is lengthening and there's parts of your spine that are going into extension. And then as you come through that stride and come back into suspension, you've got the back lifting and rounding, the limbs coming underneath. So it's a very cyclical motion.
Yeah, which really highlights the importance of the spine to be able to flex and extend in that motion. And also the importance of muscles like the iliacus and the psoas, or some people call it the iliopsoas muscles, to flex the hips and the lumbosacral part of the pelvis, so between the lumbar and the sacrum, to then create that forward motion and propulsion. But at the same time, the front end has to be able to lift to allow the propulsion that's coming from the hind end to transmit those forces. And we need healthy ligamentous structures along the top of the spine. So the supraspinous ligament, which runs all the way along the top of the spine, and it has a connection with the nuchal ligament to the head. And that ligament needs to be able to function optimally to transmit the forces of the forward motion. And I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of horses where they've got damage to that ligament, like it might be over the wither area, sometimes it's over like the back of the saddle area, or kind of the continuation of the dorsal sacroiliac ligaments over the top of the pelvis. And so that ligamentous function, along with then the core to create the flexion motion, is so important for the canter specifically.
100%. And just, you know, that space, you know, the ability to, if you're going to have any kind of restriction, so just for anybody who needs the anatomy reminder, the nuchal ligament basically starts at the wither and goes forward in the neck, reaching down to the first few neck bones of the horse, cervical vertebra, and up to the head. And then the supraspinous goes from the wither back along the spine. And if you can imagine that if you have tension in that line, how is the horse going to be able to lift, you know, through that thoracic, the rib cage, because that space has to open. The dorsal spinous process, that you're trying to open them as the core underneath the horse's belly contracts and they lift. So any restriction in that space, if it's not functioning well, you're going to be really blocked. And your hamstrings and your glutes, so the muscles running across the croup and down the back of the leg, those coming underneath the leg, having propulsion, you know, they need to be functioning well to propel the horse forward, but their ability to reach underneath the horse and do that, you know, you also need that lumbosacral area to lift and round. So the whole space is so connected.
Yeah, and that also connects with the muscles underneath the neck, so the ventral neck muscles, like the longus colli, because for the nuchal ligament to have and the supraspinous ligament to have their function and freedom to transmit those forces, we need the lower neck to be well supported, and that's also going to help lift that, keep that front end lifted also for the propulsion from the hind end to come through. So, you know, we've got really important functions of the core, so the abdominal muscles, And then within the core, you know, including the psoas muscles, so under the lumbar spine and creating flexion through that lumbosacral joint and the hips, and then the ventral neck muscles to help support the lift through that ventral neck, and then function through the spine specifically to allow that flexion and rounding of the spine for all the legs to kind of come through and push. So yeah, it requires a lot of function in the body. Like they can't get away with it's a little bit hard to fake it till you make it, you know, like a lot of horses do, and you'll see horses that swing their legs around. So especially with the hind leg, if you look at the hind legs, you'll see them and it can be evident on the outside or the inside leg, but instead of the hind leg coming through like under the body, it kind of swings around the body or swings underneath, and it stays straighter so they don't flex. Like there is a straighter limb in the canter anyway than say the trot, but a horse that say doesn't want to flex the lower limbs, say for example the hocks, they will often have a straighter, more rotary action in the limbs. And then the forelimbs, like they just might not reach as far. And then another thing which jelly does do is like they'll use the head and neck. Like the head and neck should be neutral within the canter. Like it's not creating the propulsion, the hind end is. So it should be allowing the energy to come through the body and really just be sitting in a fairly neutral position. But if there's a few reasons, right? Like if we're holding the head and neck into a position where they can't balance themselves properly in the canter, then that's going to put them down on the forehand. And also if there are issues behind and they're using their head and neck to create the propulsion, like to pull themselves along, then you'll often see the head and neck kind of have this rocking horse type motion. So it's involved in creating the motion, and it shouldn't be involved in creating the motion in a beautiful canter. Like when you ride a beautiful canter, and we were talking about this before, you literally can just sit there. Like you don't have to do a heap on the reins. It's effortless, and because of the appropriate flexion through the spine, they really carry you if they're strong enough and functional enough. And I've ridden that, and it was beautiful. It was
effortless.
Effortless. I just sat there and enjoyed the ride. And I've also ridden Jelly when his canter is horrendous, and I just feel like I've got a steam train in my hands, and I'm constantly trying to pick him up, but he can't pick up because his hind end doesn't want to carry him. And then it's a lot of work, you know. It's a lot of work. If the canter within the horse itself is not functional, it means that us as riders have to do a lot of work, and that shouldn't be the case. So what are
Yes,
some
and
other kind of, oh, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to comment on, you know, the feeling that you have while you're on the horse. Sometimes you can watch horses cantering and it'll look like their hind legs are moving, you know, it's not that they're moving together, but they're not moving very separate. And so sometimes it looks like a horse's sort of bum will go up and down a lot, but it's because the two legs aren't splitting and moving smoothly. So while one hind leg is forward and one hind leg is back, your pelvis has to have a little bit of lateral motion and also a little bit of rotation. And so, you know, the lumbosacral joint has motion, and then you've got your sacroiliac joint and your pelvis to hip joint, but also lots of soft tissue connections between crossing multiple parts of the lumbar, sacropelvic area and the hind limb. So, you know, when the legs get a little bit hoppy, like that bunny hop motion behind, it's not very smooth. And so, yeah, you can feel that when you're on the horse, but you can also
push you up.
They do, yeah. And you can see it from the ground as well. And it's valuable to watch them going and just see, you know, how are my horse's legs moving when they're in the paddock and they're choosing to go around themselves.
Yeah, and then that versus what happens when you say put them on a long lead without any gear, you know, and you ask them to go into the canter. What does that look like, you know, because if you expect them to have a nice canter for you to ride, they should be able to carry themselves in a nice canter, you know, with variation on the long lead, like on a circle or on a straight line, and hold that balance, you know, without looking like they're motorbiking in or out or down, or they get faster and faster. Like that can be an indication of a canter challenge. What are some of the other kind of behaviors? So we've talked about a few of them there, but what are some of the other behaviors that, you know, you'll see a horse that's struggling with a canter?
One is probably that head tossing motion as you come into the canter. You see it sometimes in that trot to canter transition. There'll be this kind of like head swing. It's a or up, you know, up as well. But I feel like I do see that quite a lot. People complain like he always gets cranky moving into the canter. Like I get this like cranky head motion, like, oh, I didn't love that. And that's a form of communication and just a representation that this isn't my best transition. It doesn't feel that comfortable, or it doesn't feel that stable or balanced. Even if it's not painful, it doesn't feel like a smooth transition for the horse. And you probably doesn't feel like it for you either. You might also get humping or pig rooting behind bucking into the canter, during the canter, and often there's a falling in or out, which feels like and can have to do with the forelimbs as well. We're going to discuss areas in the body that are representative, especially with the canter. You can fall in or out. And you can also have a reluctance or inability to hold the canter once you make it there. So, you know, that motion through the body just isn't sustainable. Even once you make it into the canter, fatigue can come quite easily if you're overworking a large part, you know, or just a part of the body that's doing too much work, or you're fatiguing easily because there are parts of your body that are weak, and so they also begin to struggle. There's a lot. What else do you see commonly?
Yeah, I think the head and neck brace where they throw their head up and then hollow out through the back, and then what that does is that changes your saddle fit and then can create you know, pressure points that aren't there when your horse is going in a nice posture. So it kind of then can you know, feed into a whole lot of other problems when the horse starts to hollow out their back. You know, for Jelly, like he pretty much shows all of the typical behaviors of struggling with a canter. So when he's struggling, what he does is he'll anticipate. So there's a lot of anxiety surrounding the canter. Like he'll start to think, okay, we're going to canter soon, like, you know, and I can feel his anxiety. Then the other one is that he'll go into the canter, but he'll buck during the canter, which you said, or pig root, more of a pig root into the canter. Then the third one is just feeling him heavy in the forehand, like he's pulling me down, and then he's getting faster and faster. And then the last one is when he comes back from the canter, or he might fall out of it, you know, if he's really struggling, but often he will go faster. And then the last one is when he does the downward transition, it's like his hind legs, like you said, they pop up, but also it feels uncoordinated behind, like it's not smooth transition behind. So it's like a few bumpy steps as we come back down into the trot, and it takes, you know, a few strides to get back to any rhythm in the trot. So, and then there might be within that canter like more rigidity, you know, just within the canter itself, like his back feels like there's more rigidity than what we had in the trot. The other thing is that there's often, you know, it's more one-sided than the other. Like, you know, recently Jelly's left canter has become lovely, you know, like at times we get some beautiful canter, and we have had times where it was both directions. Whereas the right canter is the one that still feels really disconnected. And that's the one that if he's going to show me anything, it'll be on that right canter. But he shows me at liberty as well as in the saddle. You know, like if I ask him to canter at liberty, I can straight away see the difference in his canters. Like with the left canter, he offers and offers and offers and offers it. Like, because he gets a little treat, like with the canter, we'll talk about this in a minute. So he offers it and he holds himself, and it's quite lovely. With the right one, like he'll go into it, it'll look awkward, he won't offer it, he'll offer me other things. He'll kind of run off and pig root. So just at liberty I could see, you know, where he's at with his canter. So if it doesn't look good without you on it, I mean, I know there are people who are exceptional riders and can really help horses, but if you've got to help them that much, there's something compromising that. So that kind of leads into some of the, you know, potential causes of canter struggles. And just before you go into some of those, I may as well just continue with Jelly's story as to why he has such a struggle. So, you know, he has myofibrillomyopathy, which is a muscle condition. But also horses with PSSM can really struggle with their canter. And I've seen horses massively change by just putting them on some Maggie. Like huge changes in their ability to canter. So we're going to talk about physical reasons that canter can be an issue, but if they've got an underlying muscle condition like PSSM or myofibrillomyopathy, when you're cantering, it requires a lot more contractile motion of those. Like it uses a lot more energy from the muscles, which is where your PSSM comes in, because it's a glycogen storage problem, which is your energy production for your muscles. And with myofibrillomyopathy, it's a contractile protein problem. So in the canter, it's requiring the most energy from the muscles and the most contraction from the muscles. And so that's why often it'll show up in the canter. I also, you know, Jelly also has other chronic challenges with his lumbar and his lumbosacropelvic area, which is, you know, probably from many years of repeated tying up, which is related to the myofibrillomyopathy. So yeah, just don't forget that as a potential underlying cause, because I've seen horses just literally change, like the canter has all of a sudden become easy when you know, we've treated it like that. What other issues? Yeah.
So if we talk about the front limbs, you can high-low syndrome is something that definitely pops up. So high-low syndrome being when one horse's foot is more upright, and so your heel of that horse looks higher and the other one looks lower. So it kind of looks like one foot is high, the other one is low, and so that obviously transfers up the body, and you can have asymmetry through the shoulders coming onto the rib cage. So often a horse will have a preferred lead. In that case, there can be restrictions in the reach of one limb for lots of different reasons. You can also have we done an episode on the hyoid? I don't know if we have, but we've done an episode on the tongue, I know, talking about the hyoid and the connection into the front limbs. So the hyoid is the bone that suspends the tongue inside the head, and there are many muscles coming between the that space down to the sternum, down to the front limb. So often there's you know, even if there's issues with the shoulders, you'll see restrictions through the hyoid and vice versa. So it's a very important area. Considering
it needs to be free to allow that extension of the head and neck and support of the ventral neck. Like if it's really tight, then the head and neck can't go into that neutral position that's required, you know, for the lift and the hind limb propulsion to come through.
What do you see in the hind limbs, problems that come through in the hinds that affect the canter?
Yeah, I think if the stifles are compromised, I think that's a stability struggle. You know, so especially the outside stifle, like when the stifle's on the outside, it puts a lot of stress on it. So sometimes that can be the cause of a problem. Hock pain, just in terms of engagement, you know, but hock pain, I believe, is often secondary to biomechanical dysfunction in the body. hamstring tension and weak glutes, so weak rump muscles, and then tight hamstrings are going to restrict the ability to utilize that hind limb like in a forward motion, and also to create like the glutes, the rump muscles are really important for creating extension through that lumbosacral area and the hip, and the importance of extension is in the push. So if the glutes are really weak and the hamstrings are then really tight, then yeah, you have a really weak push, and these horses will often have to pull themselves along. And then if there's any kind of lumbar arthritis or lumbosacral restrictions, horses can become really restricted in their lumbosacral, sometimes on one side. But we're kind of going into the body there a bit. So if we kind of go and talk about the spine and the body, what other aspects would you add in there?
So as you were just saying, that lumbosacral space, restrictions there as well as weakness. So you can have lumbar pain. There can be nerve impingements. You know, there's a huge amount of nerves coming out from the lumbar and the sacrum. So the lumbosacral plexus is coming out through that space as well. So there's a lot going on in that space. So if you have restrictions through there, one, there's a little bit of, we talked about that rotation movement, but also the flexion and extension largely in the hind end comes from that lumbosacral joint. So it's a very important space. You have restrictions there. There's also the sacroiliac joint. So dysfunction, ligament dysfunction in that space. The ligaments, they're big, they span the whole space through the pelvis. They join the sacrum to the pelvis, they join the sacrum to to the lumbosacral as well, coming forward through the supraspinous ligament. There's a lot there, and so them having chronic or chronic disruption of their structure and their function and their integrity and their comfort. You can also have injuries. That's going to have a really big effect on your canter.
Yeah, definitely. And then we talked about the importance of like the iliacus and the psoas in creating hip flexion and also allowing for extension. And that can be traumatized, especially if a horse has had their limb stuck in a fence or, they've done a big sliding stop or things like that. And so if they've got iliopsoas dysfunction, weakness, contraction, any of those things are going to affect your canter. And that can it doesn't always tie in, but like gelding scars is another big area because it can really lock down from the pelvis from below with the gelding scar. And so Jelly did have his gelding scar. He had a gelding scar that was worse, I think, on the right side, which is the hind that he struggles more with. And he has chronic iliopsoas scarring. I think I'm just trying to remember if it was specifically in the psoas or the iliacus. I can't remember right now, but he had scarring in there. So like he improved a lot with that, but he's never gonna, it's gonna be harder for him to hold it because there's scarring in there. And so along with his, I think he's got pathology in his lumbar and then the muscle condition too. But so, recognizing that they've got struggles through there means you can make a targeted program for that. And the best way to assess that is having a qualified vet who rectally can look at those muscles. But we can make quite a big assessment from gelding scars and iliacus psoas function from externally as well. And then core dysfunction, I think this is so important, and I see a lot of strain through the abdominals, like the rectus abdominis attachment, which goes up under the pelvis, and in the other abdominals too, which relate, like it's chicken and the egg with pelvic function, because pelvic function will compromise abdominals and abdominals will compromise pelvic function. And there's a fair proportion of horses who've, like humans, haven't learnt how to use their core appropriately. And so, yeah, they kind of drop their belly out in the canter. And if they've strained their core muscle, so Ellie Mae, my young horse, she has a strain in her right abdominal muscle. And yeah, canter is a challenge for her, as well as her right hind iliopsoas too, from an injury where she flipped over. So that area is super important. Do you want to just add anything to that?
No, I suppose we already spoke about the spinal restrictions preventing flexion, just the base, just reiterating that the base of the neck is very important. The horse's ability to open their throat latch, to lift through the thoracic sling, which will put the horse in a position to use their core well, flex through, the back and the lumbosacral and bring their hind legs underneath themselves. So that flow through the body is very important.
Yeah, and then the propulsion that they create through the hind end can actually create motion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously what people want to know is how are they going to improve the canter? Because what I forgot to say at the start of this episode is the reason that we're talking about the canter is that we had a listener request to talk about the canter. Like, I know we've talked a bit about some of the other gaits in different ways. But yeah, that's why we're talking about this today. So what's some of the ways that people could improve their canter?
So, for starters, making sure that there's function in the body. And by function, we mean are the ways that your horse has to move available to them. So we're saying, we want the horse to be able to flex through the spine. But if that motion is impeded for some reason, then we would describe that as not having the function needed. So function is it available? So ensuring that there's function, the thoracic sling, the base of the neck being able to lift, the core function, lumbosacropelvic, and it's very important, in the equine functional posture course that you run, it's so highlighted that what the owner does at home is a really, really core part of the horse's whole process. There's nobody better to do that work than you, and bodies need maintenance. So maintaining the body is what's needed, especially when you're coming back from dysfunction headed in a positive direction. But having a body worker who can assess bony structural function is very important. So that means looking for somebody who has, qualifications and valuable body work qualifications is very important. And having your horse on a regular schedule. I really do, I'm biased, I'm a body worker, but it's the changes that you see on a regular schedule, I don't have anybody that believes it isn't worth the investment, and the changes are wonderful, especially when the homework's being done. So that definitely improvement there is very important. Walking is incredibly important. The motion through the spine at walk and canter are the most of the 4 gaits. So a slow, controlled, balanced walk using the equiband. Do you have a comment about the equiband and how valuable it is?
Yeah, I think it's a progression, to help the horse utilize their core. And the key with it is that you don't use the hind end band by itself. So at the start, you just use the belly band, and then you can progress to the hind end band. And you do have to look at your horse and go, yes, that walk looks better with or without it. Progressing to its use in the canter is something that needs to be done over, a fair amount of time, like definitely weeks. Like I would probably say 6 weeks to progress to using it in the canter at least. But using it in the walk is super valuable because, like you said, you've got that spinal motion, and getting that control in the walk means that you're building like spinal stability, you're building more conscious awareness of the use of those core muscles, which then when you go up in the gaits, like because you're establishing a program in a slower gait with more conscious awareness, then when they need to use it a bit more automatically, because as they get faster, you know, it's going to become a bit more of an automatic reaction, it's available to them, you know, like they recognize that pattern of activation through there. So yeah, the equiband, starting with the equiband in the walk, you know, and literally starting for 5 minutes, setting a timer, walking start at the start of the session for 5 minutes, increasing every third to fourth session by 2 to 5 minutes, and literally taking it off after 5 minutes. Like I set a timer,
Yep.
and I take it
Yep.
off when 5 minutes is done, regardless of how the horse is performing. But I do look for signs of fatigue to make sure that they're able to do it for at least that period of time. You know, changing direction. You might incorporate some lateral work at the walk. That's great for improving your canter, like doing some laterals at the walk, because you know, when I do laterals with Jelly at the walk at the start of my session, I can see what motion is available to him through his pelvis. So I can go, yep, he can, especially travers, like hindquarter in. I can see, okay, he can step, he can flex through his body, he can step that outside hind under his body, he can step that inside hind forward, he's pushing, he's not overbending in front, he's holding himself. And then I can go, yep, it's the same on both sides. If it's not the same on both sides, I know that I'm not going to get a canter that day. Like, so having your horse trained in hand to be able to execute a proper hindquarter in or travers is super valuable as part of your warm up. And that ability to go slow and controlled means that they're showing you that they can actually use their core in the walk, and use, you know, transfer that weight back. The head and neck becomes soft. There's no pressure on your lead rope. And so if they're able to do that and then changeability within the walk, like they can extend and create more power, and then they can really slow down and do it super slow and stay super aligned within their spine and halt, and that's all relaxed and aligned, like you're probably going to have a great canter if you have.
Because the self-carriage is there. It's
Yeah,
true
like you're
self-carriage. I
basically
carry
testing.
myself.
Yeah, the walk can really test what your canter is going to be that day, so it's really valuable. What else?
Allowing the horse to transition out of the canter when they're tired. You know, the horse has the best understanding of when they're fatigued, and you know, when you go beyond when you're tired, your body is going to use other muscles. So if you want to be improving your canter, your canter needs to be in the best canter for the majority of the duration of the time that you're cantering. So if your horse fatigues and then they start giving you a lower quality canter, that's when it means this is time to drop out. And so your horse being able to drop out of the canter when they're tired is a good thing, and it's good to recognize, and it's a useful, I suppose, a useful point at which, you know, you noticing that will give you the ability to improve over time.
And it's recognizing what your horse's signs of fatigue are. So for some, it might be that you're having to push them more, like they just feel like they want to drop out, or it might be that they start rushing and they actually go faster, or it might be that they start like losing balance. You feel like you're having to use more inside leg, or you know, more outside rein, or their head position has changed, you know, so they've gone higher or lower with their head position. So it's recognizing those signs of fatigue so that, you know, you can stop before that point and you can go, okay, yesterday or whenever I last rode the canter, when I tried to do a whole round of the arena, you know, we had a good canter for the length of the arena, and then we couldn't get it back. So then the next time you just do the length of the arena and give breaks, and you might only do it a couple of times. Like offer me jelly, I'm only doing it 2 or 3 times maximum. And I know people who've cantered their horses for 15 minutes non-stop. And that's a lot. Like your horse needs to be very fit to maintain a good quality, well supported canter for 15 minutes. Like it is, very challenging for them to maintain that properly, and they do need to have excellent core strength. And so really it's like everything we say, it's that quality over quantity. What about helping them before you get on? So I talked about in-hand walk and traverse, but what else could they do before they get on?
So activations of the core and hind end. So that means we have a episode on activations, mobilizations, and lengthenings that I think is very valuable. But understanding that you doing activations of the core and hind end, so being able to test, does my horse have the flexion here? And when you do an exercise, so let's say I ask my horse for a little bit of pelvic flexion, when or for a belly lift or for pelvic extension, I'm gonna ask. So there are different reflexes, etc. It's all in the equine functional posture course, actually, all of this. But doing these activations means I want my horse's body to register and have the muscles for the canter well prepared to engage when we go into that gait. So I'll just explain one, for example, one being a tail pull. So when you pull on the tail as an activation, and your horse needs to be balanced, square, ready for this, possibly have done mobilizations beforehand. But when you activate from behind and you ask, you should be able to see the gluteal muscles pick up and engage because they're stabilizing. I see so many horses where they're just flat. They're like not on board, they're not activating. And so being able to um, come to those muscles and say, hey, wakey, wakey, like you need to turn, I'm about to ask you to do work. There's a handful of physiological things that happens. They get a proprioceptive rush, so they engage faster, they're primed. You get an increase in blood flow to that area, so they're ready before you go and take them up into even your warm up and then into work. And so activating all of those muscles, there's different exercises, belly lift, asking the base of the neck to lift. Essentially, the things that we talked about just before were the function. So you like asking the thoracic sling to lift, asking the core to engage, asking the pelvis to flex or to round, but also possibly even to extend. All of these things you can ask the horse to do nearly standing still or even at a walk, and the pattern carries through. And so it's a bit of a sequence we're talking about. So do you function? Is it available? If it is, I want it to activate and be priming and sequenced. And then as we go forward, we're going to use it for as long as we can, the best that we can. When we begin to fatigue, we finish. And so that sequence becomes, you just grow and grow and grow. And so, and we just did an episode on conditioning as well. So, you're conditioning the best sequence, and over time that improves your posture, your motion. And so that is, even if you don't know you're doing it, if you're getting improvement, you're using this pattern. If you're going out and you're seeing improvement through things, this is a pattern that gets you from here to there in a good way. So if you're seeing improvement, that's what you're using, even if you don't know it. So that is a very, just trying to, understand the sequence as you take it forward. So those activations are very important. Straight lines before circles. Straight lines are very useful in the canter because we described that it's an asymmetrical gait. So, left hind and then right hind, left fore strike at the same time, right fore out the front. That's on a right lead. So as that happens, you imagine if you're on a bend, you've got all of your joints between the ground and the spine, and then the spine also has to have a bit of a bend. So it's actually more complicated and asking a bit more balance of your horse to be on a bend as opposed to on the straight. So also being on the straight means that you can have the motion going through the spine in a straight line, the rotation is, it's a good place to warm your horse up in straight lines, because the rotation is there in a canter, but doing it on the straight is different from doing it on the bend. So being able to practice both leads in a straight line is very healthy. And also because if it's a little bit easier for your horse, that might be something that you should always be doing that first and making sure that your straight lines are good before you're asking for bend as well.
Yeah, it will really show up where you're at too, because if you can't do a straight line, then they're probably not doing a circle in balance, even though it seems easier. They're often, it seems easier because they can lean or fall or, you know, kind of catch themselves in or out. So yeah, the straight lines give you a lot of information. But overall, like what all the things that we just kind of said, you can really recognize if you're going to have a good canter before you canter. So looking at all of those quality of motions of, you know, the walked activations, the function of the pelvis, all of that, you will be able to discern what your canter is going to be like on that day. And I can 100% vouch for that, because when I have a little pre-warm up that I do with Jelly, and if he doesn't do that well and I decide to canter that day, it's always crappy. Like it always feels terrible. But if everything is good and he has good motion and comfort in it, then generally it feels the canter is good for that day. So it's really understanding, you know, that the canter is a conversation between balance, strength, and trust. Like they have to trust their own body, and also trust that if they say that they can't do it, that you're going to prioritize that comfort and communication and reward them for that rather than force them to keep going, because that's when we create a lot of anxiety. And I've been playing with Jelly recently, you know, because there's a fair bit of anxiety linked to his canter because he's had so many challenges with it over the years. And so I decided to play with it at liberty with some positive reinforcement. And it's very interesting because as soon as he clicked on to what we're doing, like he will start offering that left canter especially. And then he does the best transitions that I've ever seen, and he actually really collects himself. And then with the right, like I said, if it's feeling difficult for him, he will offer me other things.
Yeah.
Or he will, you know, show me in the way that his balance is, or he'll drop out quite quickly. Whereas the left one, he'll be happy to continue and keep cantering if I ask him to keep cantering. And what that's doing, you know, by doing it at liberty, it means that I can see where his true balance is. And I can also see his motivation to do it, you know, because I'm not forcing him. Like I literally showed him the first session I showed him it was available. I didn't chase him into it. Like he knows the word canter. And as soon as, yeah, he knew, okay, if I do this, I'm going to get a reward. But then on the right side, he was running off and bucking and offering me like collected trot and to stop and different things. So like pushing him into that right canter is not necessarily the answer, because he's already telling me, I know what you want. Like
Yeah.
I've registered what you want, but I just physically can't give it to you. So it gives me a lot of feedback about how he feels about it physically, mentally, and emotionally. So that's that can be a really cool way to improve that anxiety too, by adding in that positive reward. Awesome. So what are your takeaways about the canter?
Um, Number one would be that it's valuable to watch your horse and look carefully at the hind limbs to see, you know, are they disuniting? It's worth getting better at reading their footfalls, comparing the leading front leg to the leading hind limb. So they should both be reaching forward the furthest of both the hind limbs and both the forelimbs.
On the
And
inside.
on the inside, yeah, when the horse is bending around you know, on that, yeah, so if your horse is cantering to the right, then the right hind and the right fore should be reaching furthest the forward. And just having a look, you know, does it look like they're bending their limbs equally? Does it look like they're swinging them or, doing any excessive paddling as opposed to being able to pick them up and carry them through nicely? But also registering your horse's behavior in the canter. So we strongly believe, and so does the research, that your horse's expressions, your horse's behavior, they're all communication, so they're representative of the horse's experience in their own body. So their willingness to enter and maintain the canter in different directions, their freedom, what does it feel like, the quality of the motion, and the comfort of the motion, judging their transitions, the quality of them, everything there, the things that we're talking about, the bucking, the irritability, the possibility for humping, or, the other things that pop up, the crankiness, but also anticipation. If there's an area you would consistently canter, or, how does your horse act around that or coming into that space? And it's important to know too that rushing into the canter isn't excitement for the canter or love. There's a difference between being forward thinking and looking into something and rushing. So that can also be anticipation or anxiety. It's important to observe your horse without any gear and make sure that the self carriage is there, not just when you're on them or seeing a video of you riding them. What are your takeaways?
I would say recognize where the problem exists, so is it transitioning in or out, or is it during the canter? Is it, only on a circle compared to on a straight line? Is it the maintenance of it? Just trying to recognize where it is, because that can really help your body worker to kind of get down to the underlying problem, or your vet. And I'd also, recommend, just like you said, observing. So video your horse both on a long lead without any gear on, and ridden, and look at the video, slow it down, have a look at how their footfalls are, have a look at the body outline, like the head and the neck, where their balance of their weight is, does it look like it's all on the forehand, or do they actually look like they're pushing from behind, or are they rushing? And so I think, just observing is really valuable. And I think often we observe the whole horse and probably a lot the head and neck position, and don't learn how to observe other things like the limbs and what the rest of the spine is doing and the balance of the body. So it's just developing your eye to a level of observation, and being quite objective about that. And just looking at lots of horses cantering to try and get your eye in on that. And especially paddock, that's very useful too, just looking at how your horse canters in the paddock and how they transition in and out in the paddock. It's useful information as well. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler, and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. I'd love you to join us for the free up-and-coming Posture and Masterclass on Thursday, the 23rd of October. There's 2 available times that you can join us, and we talk about lots of connections between posture and behaviour. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.